Maple Ridge, Washington. October 26, 1994. 17-year-old Sarah Miller vanished after her shift at the local drive-in, leaving behind only her cherry red '89 Mustang and a Walkman playing Bon Jovi's "Livin' on a Prayer." For 30 years, her case grew cold, a testament to a single, misplaced trust that shattered a family. The cherry red 1989 Ford Mustang was still there, parked neatly in the corner of the Starlight's gravel lot, as if waiting for its owner to return. Inside, on the passenger seat, was Sarah Miller's faded blue work apron, the name Sarah embroidered in white thread. But it was the sound that Detective Roy Peterson would never forget. The tinny, desperate rasp of John Bon Jovi still playing from a Sony Walkman left on the car's roof. Whoa, we're halfway there. "Livin' on a Prayer." The song echoed in the cold October air, a stark contrast to the terrifying silence that now surrounded the scene. Sarah, a vibrant 17-year-old with college brochures hidden under her bed, was gone. It was October 26, 1994. The only thing she left behind was a lesson, one this town would learn too late, about how a single decision to trust a friendly face could be the last one you ever make. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The Starlight Drive-In was more than a job for Sarah Miller. It was the beating heart of her social world. That final Wednesday night had a bite of winter in the air, a preview of the cold to come. She zipped up her denim jacket, the one with the Def Leppard patch on the sleeve, and balanced a tray of empty popcorn boxes. The speaker posts stood like silent sentinels between the rows of cars, their hooks waiting for the crackle of the next show. The smell was a unique cocktail of nostalgia-buttered popcorn, gasoline, and damp autumn leaves. Inside the cramped concession stand, the radio was tuned to the local rock station. She hummed along with November Rain as she wiped down the counter. Her best friend Chloe was restocking Nay sodas. "He's gonna be mad, you know," Chloe said, not looking up from the crate. "When you tell him." Sarah sighed, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I know, but I have to go. It's my chance. He doesn't get it. He thinks Maple Ridge is the whole world." She was talking about Mark, her secret boyfriend of 6 months. A 20-year-old mechanic with grease perpetually under his fingernails and a possessiveness that sometimes felt like a cage. Her father didn't approve, so they met in secret. Later, a college boy named Jason, in a brand new Camaro, flirted with her when she brought his chili dog. He was all clean-cut confidence and promises of frat parties. She smiled politely, but her heart wasn't in it. She was waiting for the rumble of Mark's pickup truck. When the last credits of the second feature rolled and the lot began to empty, Sarah clocked out. The giant screen went dark. Mr. Davison, the manager, a kindly man in his 30s who always smelled of cigarillos, gave her a tired smile. "You heading out, kid? Be careful." "Mark's picking me up," she said, pulling her scrunchie from her hair. But Mark was late. The parking lot emptied, leaving her Mustang and Mr. Davison's old station wagon. The night was suddenly very quiet and very dark. She saw Mr. Davison locking up the projection booth. "Hey, Sarah? You need a ride? It's getting cold." She hesitated. She and Mark had a fight on the phone earlier. He'd been in a mood. "No, it's okay, Mr. Davison. He'll be here." "Suit yourself, kid. Don't stay out too late." He got into his car and drove off, his taillights disappearing down the access road. Alone, she leaned against her Mustang, the cold metal seeping through her jacket. She popped in her mixtape, and Bon Jovi filled her ears. She was lost in the music, in her dreams of a future beyond this town, when a set of headlights turned in, not from the main road, but from the back service lane. It wasn't Mark's truck. It was a sedan. The car pulled up beside her, and the passenger window rolled down. It was a face she knew, a face she trusted. "Hey, Sarah, car trouble?" I saw you standing out here all alone. Need a lift? It was an offer made from kindness, or so it seemed. A simple decision on a cold night. With a shrug and a grateful smile, she opened the passenger door and got in. It was a decision that would haunt Maple Ridge for 30 years. The lesson had begun, a lesson in the devastating cost of trusting the wrong person, of a kindness that hid a cruel and selfish heart. The void she left behind was a physical weight in the chest of every officer on the scene. Detective Roy Peterson arrived as the sun was rising, casting a weak orange light over the Starlight's gravel. The cherry-red Mustang looked surreal, a monument to normalcy in the heart of a nightmare. The forensic photographer's flash popped, illuminating the car's interior in stark, momentary bursts. There was no sign of a struggle. Her work apron was folded neatly on the seat. Her keys were in the ignition. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the crisp autumn air, leaving only the ghost of a pop anthem behind. Peterson, a man built like a linebacker with a father's weary eyes, crouched by the driver's side door. He ran a hand over his close-cropped gray hair. His own daughter was 16. The thought was a cold knot in his stomach. His partner, Detective Linda Chung, young and sharp with a mind that embraced the newfangled computers starting to appear in the squad room, was already taking notes on a steno pad. "Walkman's out of batteries now," she said quietly. But the witnesses, the last people to leave the lot, said it was still playing when they drove out. The initial 48 hours were a frantic blur of analog police work, a dance of paper and human memory. They used landline phones, their cords stretched taut across desks. They filled out forms in triplicate with carbon paper. Roy's desk was a landscape of manila folders and styrofoam coffee cups. The community rumor mill, a powerful force in a town like Maple Ridge, churned out theories faster than they could debunk them. They started with the obvious: the boyfriend. Mark was brought in for questioning. He was a raw-boned young man, his hands still stained with the engine grease from his night job. The interview room was small, the air thick with the smell of old cigarette smoke and anxiety. He didn't want her to leave, Roy stated, his voice calm but firm. "Heard you two had a fight about it on the phone." Mark's jaw tightened. "So? People fight." "I loved her. I was scared of losing her. I went to the drive-in to talk to her, to smooth things over, but she was already gone. Her car was there, but she was gone. I figured she got a ride with Chloe or something. I was mad, so I left." His alibi was weak. He claimed he was working alone in the garage his uncle owned, but there were no time cards, no witnesses. He was a storm of anger and hurt, an easy suspect to picture. Then there was the college boy, Jason, clean-cut, driving a car that cost more than Roy made in a year. He was dismissive, almost bored. "Yeah, I talked to her. She was cute. I asked her if she wanted to come to a party at the university this weekend. She said she had a boyfriend." End of story. A check with the campus security placed him at a dormitory poker game miles away at the time of the disappearance. And through it all, there was Sarah's father, John Miller, a quiet, stoic man who worked at the lumberyard. His face was a mask of shattered composure. He sat in Roy's office, clutching a framed photo of Sarah from middle school. "She was a good girl," he kept saying, his voice rough with emotion. "A good girl. She wouldn't just run away." It was John who, through his grief, gave them the first real thread. "She was seeing that boy, the mechanic, Mark. I told her he was no good. She didn't listen. She was keeping things from me. She had a secret bank account for college. She was saving up to leave. A secret boyfriend. A secret plan." The narrative was building, and it all pointed back to Mark. They brought him in again. This time, they had a warrant for his home and his toolbox at the garage. In a canvas roll of wrenches, they found it. A large, heavy monkey wrench. And on the polished metal of the head, a dark, rust-colored stain. The forensics lab in Seattle was backlogged, but they rushed the analysis. The report came back a week later, a single page of typeset text that felt like a letdown. Sample confirms presence of human blood. Typo? Roy slammed the file on his desk. Typo? That's Sarah's type, but it's also nearly half the damn country's type. It was 1994. DNA profiling existed in high-profile FBI cases, but for a local police department, it was science fiction, an expensive fantasy. The wrench was circumstantial. Without a body, without a crime scene, without modern science. The case was built on sand. Mark vehemently denied it was Sarah's blood. It's transmission fluid, or it's mine. I bust my knuckles all the time. But the town had its villain. The whispers grew louder. Mark was guilty. The case was solved. But Roy Peterson looked at the evidence. The lack of a struggle, the missing body, the flimsy blood evidence, and felt a deep, gnawing doubt. He had followed the obvious path, the angry young man, and it had led him to a cliff's edge. By Christmas, the file was moved to a metal cabinet in the basement. The case was cold, and Roy's failure was a ghost that would follow him home every night for the next 30 years. A lesson in the fallibility of human judgment and the danger of a single-minded focus. The ghost of Sarah Miller took up residence in Roy Peterson's garage, her case file sealed in a dusty cardboard box next to a can of old paint and his daughter's forgotten rollerblades. For 30 years, it was a quiet ghost. But on the anniversary of her disappearance, or when he drove past the overgrown lot where the Starlight Drive-In had once stood, he could hear the faint, tinny echo of Bon Jovi and feel the chill of that October morning. Retirement wasn't the quiet peace he'd imagined. It was a landscape of silence where past failures had room to breathe and grow. He filled his days with small projects, fixing a leaky faucet, building a birdhouse, but his mind was often in that 1994 squad room, staring at the photo of a smiling girl and the report on a blood-stained wrench. The invitation to the law enforcement technology seminar felt like a chore. He only went to get out of the house. The seminar hall was a world away from his Crown Victoria and paper notepads. Young agents spoke of algorithms, data mining, and digital footprints. Roy felt like a relic. Then, a representative from a private lab took the stage. She began talking about forensic genealogical DNA analysis. It sounded like science fiction. She explained how they could take an old, degraded DNA, a sample from a cold case, for instance, and use it not to find a direct match in a criminal database, but to find the suspect's distant relatives in public genealogy databases. By building out a massive family tree, they could reverse engineer the identity of the source of the DNA. It's like finding a needle in a haystack by identifying all the other pieces of straw that are related to it. She said. Roy was deeply skeptical. It felt invasive, a parlor trick. But a single, stubborn thought lodged in his mind. Asterisk the wrench. The blood on the wrench. Asterisk, leaving the seminar. Lost in thought, he stopped at the grocery store. Pushing his cart past the produce aisle, he nearly collided with another. The man was old, bent with age, his hands gnarled and trembling as they gripped the cart's handle. It was John Miller, Sarah's father. The years had not been kind. The stoic strength Roy remembered had been eroded by decades of grief. His eyes, once sharp, were milky with cataracts. "Mr. Miller," Roy said, his voice soft. "It's Roy Peterson." Recognition dawned slowly. "Detective," John whispered. He didn't speak of the case, of the failure. Instead, he pointed a shaky finger toward the floral department. "I'm getting some fertilizer for Sarah's garden. The tulips, they're not coming in like they used to." The simple statement was a hammer blow. This man had spent 30 years tending a garden for a daughter who was never coming home. He was still living with the consequence of a crime everyone else had forgotten. The ghost in Roy's garage suddenly had a voice, and it was screaming. That afternoon, Roy didn't go home. He drove to the precinct and asked to see the new cold case lieutenant, a sharp woman in her 40s named Detective Hayes. He laid it out for her: the 1994 disappearance, the wrench, the type O blood. "We have the sample," Roy said, his voice gaining a conviction he hadn't felt in years. "It was preserved. This new genealogy, it's a long shot. But it's a shot." Detective Hayes was hesitant. It was expensive, time-consuming. The process was complex, requiring specialized genealogists, and it wasn't a magic bullet. It could lead to false leads, to innocent people being traumatized. But she saw the fire in the old detective's eyes. She saw the weight of the unclosed file. She agreed to submit the request. The sample from the wrench was sent to a private lab. Weeks turned into months. Roy's hope began to wane again. He'd pull his old Crown Vic out of the garage sometimes, just to sit in the familiar smell of vinyl and stale coffee, the ghost of his former self keeping company with the ghost of Sarah Miller. He was an old dog trying to learn a new trick, and he was terrified that this final high-tech gamble would only confirm his greatest failure. The lesson here, he feared, was that some doors, once closed, were never meant to be reopened. The call from Detective Hayes came on a Tuesday morning. Roy was in his garage, staring at the cardboard box that held the ghost of Sarah Miller. Hayes' voice was different, no longer politely humoring a retired cop, but charged with a focused energy. "Peterson, we got the genealogical report. You need to come in." The modern precinct was a foreign land of silent, flat-screen monitors and the soft tap of keyboards. Hayes stood before a smartboard, a complex, sprawling diagram displayed on it. It looked like a spider's web of names and dates. "This is it," she said, pointing. "This is the family tree built from the DNA on that wrench." Roy leaned in, his old eyes tracing the lines. It was a map of strangers. The process wasn't clean, Hayes explained, keeping it real. "The sample was degraded. We got a partial profile. The genealogists didn't find a direct parent or child. They had to work with third and fourth cousins, people sharing less than 1% of their DNA with our suspect. It took months to build this out, cross-referencing public records, obituaries, marriage certificates. Our finger landed on a single name, highlighted in red, at the end of a long, winding branch of the family tree. It was a name that meant nothing to Roy. It was no one they had ever looked at. "The DNA points to a man named David," Hayes said. "David Higgins." Roy shook his head, a cold dread mixing with confusion. Who the hell is David Higgins? He was never in our files. He wasn't a friend, a boyfriend, an enemy. Hayes clicked a button. An old DMV photo from the early 90s appeared on the screen next to the family tree. It was a soft-faced man with receding hair and kind, almost shy eyes. Roy's breath caught in his throat. The air left the room. The kind, shy eyes from the DMV photo superimposed themselves over a memory from 30 years ago. A man locking up the concession stand, smelling of cigarillos, offering a ride to a waiting teenager. His name was Davison, Roy whispered, the word tasting like ash. The drive-in manager. His name was Michael Davison. He was adopted, Hayes said quietly. Born David Higgins. His records were sealed. The family that adopted him, the Davisons, aren't genetically related. That's why he never appeared in any of our family checks. The DNA led us to his birth name, his bloodline. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet, unassuming manager. The man who had been the last confirmed person to see Sarah Miller alive. The man who had expressed concern, who had been interviewed and dismissed as a harmless, grieving friend of the family. They had been so focused on the storm of anger that was Mark, They had completely overlooked the quiet, still waters of Michael Davison. The lesson of the misplaced trust, hinted at in the very beginning, now roared back with the force of a tidal wave. They had all trusted him. Sarah had trusted him. The police had trusted him. He was the background noise of the town, invisible in his normalcy. Hayes laid out the next steps, the modern corollary to Roy's old-school canvassing. We can't just bring him in. This genealogical data is for investigative leads only. It's not enough for an arrest. We need to confirm it. We need a fresh DNA sample from him to compare directly to the sample on the wrench. They began a quiet, meticulous surveillance of the man now known to be David Higgins, aka Michael Davison. He was retired, living in a small, well-kept bungalow on the other side of town. He was a grandfather. He volunteered at the library. He was a pillar of benign, elderly normality. Roy watched him through binoculars from an unmarked car, his stomach churning. This man had lived a full life for 30 years, while Sarah Miller lay in an unmarked grave. He saw Davison tending his rosebush, his movements slow and deliberate. He saw him wave to a neighbor. The ordinariness of it was the most monstrous thing Roy had ever witnessed. The break came when a forensic tech, shadowing Davison, watched him enter a diner. He sat at the counter, drank a cup of coffee, and ate a slice of cherry pie. When he left, the tech moved in, money in hand. He paid for the pie, and more importantly, he collected the porcelain cup Davison had drunk from, carefully bagging the lipstick-like smear of his saliva on the rim. The direct comparison took only 48 hours. The result was a definitive, scientific truth that closed a circle 3 decades wide. The DNA from the saliva on the coffee cup was a perfect match to the bloodstain on the wrench, found in Mark's toolbox 30 years earlier. Michael Davison, the friendly manager, had planted the evidence. He had framed the angry, easy-to-suspect boyfriend. He had watched the investigation focus on Mark with silent satisfaction, secure in his own invisibility. The quiet man had not been so quiet after all. He had spoken with the cruelest of actions, and they had all misunderstood the language. The consequence of their collective misjudgment had been 30 years of injustice. A lesson in the terrifying truth that the most dangerous monsters are the ones who look just like everybody else. The interrogation room in 2024 was a study in sterile silence. A world away from the smoky, tense box of 1994. The walls were a pale, calming gray, and a small, discreet camera in the corner recorded everything in high definition. Michael Davison, now a frail man in his late 60s with thin, white hair and liver-spotted hands, sat perfectly still. Across from him were Detective Hayes and a silent, watchful Roy Peterson. Hayes began not with an accusation, but with a calm, almost conversational tone. "Michael, we're revisiting the Sarah Miller case. New technologies have given us a fresh perspective." She slid a photograph of the bloody wrench across the table. "We know this was planted in Mark's toolbox." Davison's eyes, still that same pale shade of blue, flickered down at the picture and then back up, a mask of polite confusion. "I don't know what you mean. That was the evidence against that boy, wasn't it?" "It was," Hayes agreed. "But the blood on it wasn't his." She let the silence hang for a moment, the hum of the climate control system the only sound. "We ran a new kind of DNA test, Michael. A test that can build a family tree from a tiny sample. It led us to a man named David Higgins." Roy, from his chair against the wall, saw it. A microscopic tremor in Davison's left hand. A barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. The mask had cracked, if only for a fraction of a second. "Who?" Davison asked, his voice a dry rustle. "Your birth name," Roy said, speaking for the first time. His voice was low, heavy with 3 decades of regret. "You were adopted. The Davisons were good people, but they weren't your blood. Your blood was on that wrench, Michael. Hayes placed another document on the table. It was the DNA match report, the one linking the saliva from the coffee cup to the wrench. "It's over, Michael. We know you offered her a ride. We know she trusted you. What happened in the car?" Davison looked from one face to the other, the facade of the kindly retiree crumbling into dust. The politeness vanished, replaced by a weary, petulant defiance. She thought she was too good for this town. Too good for that loutmark. Too good for everything. He spat the words out. "I offered her a ride. I was being nice." And she started talking about her big college plans, about getting away. She was laughing. She said the Starlight was a dead-end job for dead-end people. He looked down at his own wrinkled hands, as if seeing the past reflected in them. I saw red. I had given that girl a job. I was kind to her. And she was just gonna throw it all away. Throw this town away, like it was nothing. He didn't describe the act itself. He didn't need to. The horror was in the chilling banality of his motive, a fit of rage born of wounded pride and a twisted sense of ownership. "I took her out to the old gravel pits near the drive-in," he murmured, his voice devoid of all emotion now. "It was my secret spot. I buried her there. Then I went to Mark's garage. I knew he'd been working on his truck. I saw the wrench, took it, put her blood on it, and put it back. It was easy. You were all so eager to believe it was him." The confession was clinical, devoid of remorse. It was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The life lesson was no longer a hint or a theme. It was a stark, brutal truth etched into the soul of everyone in the room. Evil doesn't always snarl. Sometimes it offers you a ride home on a cold night with a friendly smile. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. A week later, under a gray and weeping sky, a small group stood at the edge of the overgrown gravel pits. The rusted skeleton of the Starlight Drive-In screen was visible through the trees, a ghost watching over the proceedings. With Michael Davison's directions, forensic teams had located Sarah Miller's remains. Roy Peterson stood slightly apart from the official gathering, his hat in his hand. He watched as the coroner's van prepared to leave, finally carrying Sarah home. He felt no triumph, only a profound, hollow sadness. The ghost was laid to rest, but the memory of his failure and the chilling nature of the truth would linger. John Miller, supported by his wife, a woman aged by grief into a fragile sculpture, walked slowly over to Roy. The old man's eyes, clouded but clear in their intent, met Roy's. "Thank you, Detective," John whispered, his voice cracking, "for not giving up." Roy could only nod, the words stuck in his throat. He had spent 30 years believing the lesson was about the obvious suspect, the angry young man. He now knew the real lesson was far more terrifying. It was about the quiet neighbor, the friendly face, the person you'd never suspect. It was about the devastating cost of a misjudgment made in the dark, a lesson in the absolute, world-shattering consequences of trusting a monster disguised as a man. As the van pulled away, Roy looked back one last time at the empty pit. The case was closed, but the echo of that 1994 Bon Jovi song and the image of a smiling Michael Davison offering a ride would haunt him forever. A permanent, painful reminder of the darkness that can hide in the most ordinary of places. The final chapter was not written in a courtroom, but in the quiet, private spaces of a town forever changed. The legal proceedings against Michael Davison were swift and anticlimactic. His confession, backed by the irrefutable genealogy report and the direct DNA match, left no room for defense. He was sentenced to life in prison, a frail old man being led away to live out his remaining days in a cage. There were no dramatic outbursts, no last-minute reveals. It was a quiet, bureaucratic end to a decades-long scream. For Roy Peterson, closure was a complex and bittersweet thing. The ghost of Sarah Miller was no longer in his garage, but she had taken up a new residence in his mind, now at peace, yet forever a reminder. He visited her grave on a bright, crisp morning, the kind that should have belonged to her future. The headstone was simple, finally bearing the correct date of death. October 26, 1994. He placed a single flower on the fresh earth, not out of a sense of duty, but for the girl whose story he had finally helped finish. He thought of Mark, the man whose life had been shadowed by suspicion for 30 years. A simple, quiet man who had loved a girl and been punished for it by a monster's cleverness. The lesson of misjudgment was etched into Mark's life, a permanent scar. There was no way to give him those decades back, but the most profound reflection came from the case itself. The life lesson, which had subtly woven itself through every step of the investigation, now stood clear and stark. It was not merely about the danger of trusting strangers. It was about the human tendency to fear the loud, obvious storm, the angry boyfriend, the flamboyant stranger, while completely missing the silent, deep-running current of malice that flowed beneath the surface of normalcy. Michael Davison wasn't a phantom. He was a neighbor, a manager, a grandfather. His evil wasn't born in a dramatic moment, but in the quiet, simmering cauldron of pride, resentment, and a sense of ownership over a young life he felt was indebted to him. The consequence of his single, impulsive act of violent rejection was a calculus of pain that spanned generations. A vibrant life stolen, a family shattered, an innocent man haunted, and a detective burdened with guilt. It was a lesson in humility for Roy, a reminder that the easy answer is rarely the true one, and that justice, however delayed, requires the courage to question everything, even the most trusted of faces. The technology, the forensic genealogy, had been the key that unlocked the truth. But it was the old human doggedness, the refusal to let a ghost rest, that had turned the key. The case of Sarah Miller became a quiet legend in Maple Ridge, not for its horror, but for its lesson. It taught the town that while the past can be buried, it is never truly gone, and that the pursuit of truth, no matter how long it takes, is the only tribute worthy of a lost life. The final quiet lesson was one of perseverance, that some debts to the past must be paid, no matter how many years it takes to settle the account. The story of Sarah Miller was over, but its echoes settled deep into the bedrock of Maple Ridge. For the townspeople who remembered that bright-eyed girl from the Starlight Drive-In, the resolution was a strange, somber relief. The mystery was solved, but the truth was more unsettling than any of their long-held theories. The monster hadn't been a shadowy stranger or a hot-headed boyfriend. He had been the man who sold them popcorn and joked with their children. Roy Peterson found his peace not in a single moment, but in a gradual shifting of weight. He started visiting John Miller not as a detective, but as a friend. They would sit on John's porch, the same porch Sarah had left from on that final night, and they wouldn't speak of the case. They spoke of the weather, of the tulips John still tenderly cared for, of their grandchildren. It was in these quiet moments that Roy understood the final, most enduring life lesson of the entire ordeal: the power of quiet resilience. The human spirit's ability to endure, to find a way to keep living, and even find moments of grace after being shattered by a cruelty it can never fully comprehend. John Miller had lost his daughter, but he had not allowed the man who took her to steal his entire world. He had chosen to plant tulips in the ruins. Roy, too, made a choice. He took the dusty box from his garage, but he didn't throw it away. He carefully filed the official reports and stored them. But he took the old, faded Polaroid of Sarah Miller, the one that had haunted his desk for 30 years, and he placed it on his own mantelpiece at home. It was no longer a symbol of his failure, but a quiet reminder of a promise finally kept. It was a tribute to the importance of seeing an investigation through, not for the glory, but for the simple, profound act of returning a lost girl to her family. The story of the 1994 Maple Ridge disappearance became a permanent part of the town's history, a chilling folktale whispered to new residents. But for those who lived through it, the lesson was clear and personal. It was a lesson in vigilance, not of the loud and obvious dangers, but of the quiet, insidious ones. It was about the consequence of a single, hidden flaw in a person's character, a prideful, possessive heart, and how that flaw could radiate outwards, causing decades of collateral damage. It taught that trust is a precious currency, and that its betrayal is the most costly crime of all. And finally, it was a lesson in the enduring power of truth, that even when it sleeps for 30 years, it can be awakened by a combination of relentless human spirit and the march of progress. To finally bring a lost girl home, the final, quiet lesson of the Maple Ridge disappearance was not found in a courtroom or a headline, but in the slow, healing rhythm of ordinary life. For Roy Peterson, the ghost was finally laid to rest. He no longer heard the phantom Bon Jovi tape in his mind. Instead, the memory of Sarah Miller became a settled, peaceful presence, a reminder of a debt paid and a promise fulfilled. He found he could now talk about the case without the old, familiar knot of guilt in his stomach. He spoke of it not as his greatest failure, but as his most profound lesson in the fallibility of human judgment and the enduring need for truth. The town, too, absorbed the story into its bones. The old Starlight Drive-In lot was finally cleared, not to make way for a new development, but to become a small, serene park. The town council, with John Miller's blessing, named it Miller's Grove. It was a place for families, for children to play, a living rebuttal to the darkness that had once festered there. It was a testament to the lesson that life and kindness must always be chosen over despair. John Miller, though bowed by age and loss, found a new purpose. He became the unofficial caretaker of the grove. He would often be seen there, puttering among the young oak trees and flower beds, a quiet, dignified figure. The neighborhood children, who knew only a vague story about a lost girl, saw him simply as the nice old man who sometimes gave them candy. He had endured the ultimate consequence of a cruelty he did not cause, yet he had chosen to channel his grief into nurturing a place of beauty and peace. His life became the ultimate expression of the story's moral, that while we cannot control the evil others do, we retain absolute power over our own response. We can choose to be defined by the darkness, or we can choose, like John, to plant tulips in the memory of what was lost. The case of Sarah Miller faded from the news, but its essence remained, woven into the fabric of Maple Ridge. It served as a quiet, enduring caution about the masks people wear and the devastating cost of a trust betrayed. But more than that, it became a story about the long arc of justice, the resilience of the human heart, and the humble, powerful courage it takes to never, ever give up on the truth. The lesson was complete. The consequence of one man's hidden evil was met, decades later, with the collective consequence of a community's and a family's unwavering, quiet strength. Of course. Here's the final, reflective narration that brings the story to its emotional conclusion. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The old case file was closed, this time for good. The legal machinery had ground to a halt. The headlines had faded, and Maple Ridge settled back into its quiet rhythm. But the town, and the people forever touched by Sarah Miller's disappearance, were irrevocably changed. The resolution was not a victory. It was a reckoning, one that left behind a profound and sobering clarity. For Roy Peterson, the ghost was no longer a specter of failure, but a quiet, settled memory. He could finally sit on his porch in the evening, the sounds of the neighborhood around him, without the echo of a Bon Jovi tape playing in his mind. He had learned the hardest lesson of his long career, that justice delayed is not justice denied, but justice weighted with the heavy cost of time. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and the simple, stubborn power of refusing to let a story end without its true final chapter. He had given John Miller the one thing he thought was lost forever, the truth. And for John, the truth was enough. He still visited Miller's Grove every day, his gnarled hands tending the soil where children now laughed. He was not tending a grave, but a legacy. The park was his answer to the darkness, a living, breathing monument to the idea that life and light must always be chosen. He had endured the ultimate consequence of a single hidden act of cruelty, yet his response was not one of bitterness, but of profound, quiet grace. He had taught everyone in Maple Ridge the story's ultimate lesson, that we are defined not by the tragedies that befall us, but by the courage and kindness we choose to cultivate in their aftermath. The story of Sarah Miller, the Starlight Drive-In, and the quiet man who hid a monster's heart became a permanent part of the town's soul. It was a cautionary tale, yes, a stark reminder of the devastating cost of misplaced trust and the evil that can fester behind a familiar face. But it was also a testament to the enduring power of perseverance, the promise of new technology to right old wrongs, and the unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. The case was a closed file, the lesson was learned, and a small town, at long last, could finally find peace.